And with a politically charged environment, I caught up with Finance Deputy Minister Ashor Sarupen for a look into the challenges of implementing tax policies and how the Department of Finance has responded to those. Here are those insights.
It's important to understand that there are two buckets in which we are dealing with problems. The first is the domestic bucket, the things that we have control over. There are things you can control and things you can't control, but affect you. The first are the things we can control, and it is around the structure of the economy, the market structure around logistics and energy, also on municipal reform. And obviously in the last year, knowing that the failure of municipalities has become such a big break in economic growth as well, that we've shifted, for example, Operation Vulindlela to look into municipalities. We've brought in things like Metro Trading Services reform and got some World Bank support for that to deal with some of these problems. These are deep systemic problems, so you won't see the results immediately, but over 5 years, we will start delivering results in those areas. And I think that's quite important. So what can you control? What is in your hands? Then there's the second bucket, things that are in the global environment that have hit us quite hard. The tariffs in the United States, the shift in policy framework in the US towards a more America first idea. Now the electorates of different countries have spoken, and we had the biggest year of democracy on record last year. So many countries went to elections, and it produced some shifts, and we've got to adapt to those shifts. Of course, it's not Treasury alone. A lot of that in trade is DTIC and foreign affairs and international relations are now known, and they have to handle those sorts of things. What we have got to do is make sure that we deliver the kinds of resources to the right functions in the state to ensure that we respond to these challenges. And of course, it is very difficult in a constrained fiscal environment to do that. But within the resources we have, without overburdening the taxpayer, without accelerating borrowing, with keeping to our commitments to the financial markets, and so on, so that we maintain South Africa's macroeconomic stability and credibility, we have to respond to these things. So obviously on the domestic side, a lot of it is policy-orientated reform. Some of it, like municipal reform, we get some money from the World Bank in and Metro Trading Services, for example. On the international side, we have got to be able to make sure that the system can respond quickly and build the buffers that we need. And that's where the focus has been.
How easy or difficult is it for the budget to read the room amid, I guess, a more dynamic political landscape?
Yeah, so again, going back to the two buckets analogy, there's the domestic political landscape, multi-party democracy, a genuine multi-party government for the first time in South Africa in the democratic era. And that means that obviously we are dependent more than ever on cabinet reaching consensus and agreeing. So one of the things we've done is reform the budget process so that starting with the NTBPS this year, we give more forward guidance, we get more buy-in and so on. Because our budget process was designed in an era where you had a single predominant party and a strong finance minister who needed to make sure rationality got through the system, we now need to make sure that rationality gets through a system with as much political buy-in as possible from different parties, because there's no guarantee of a parliamentary majority without that. So that's the first thing on the political pressures. On the international side, I mean, the Treasury is not responsible for international relations or trade policy. That sits squarely with those departments. So we can play a facilitative and supportive role, we can lend advice, we can do policy modeling, technical work there as well to help facilitate these things. It is important, we do important work. Of course, we will in the NTBPS put out revised revenue projection and growth forecasts with this as the backdrop of what's going on with the global volatility that we are now seeing. And we will pull the levers that we can on fiscal policy within the environment that we have to do so. But of course, it's very, very difficult because we don't control those levers. We don't dictate trade policy, unfortunately, and that is how the functions of government are assigned.
Very interesting thing that you highlight there, of course, that you have one job, but also there are other organs of the economic environment, the state as well, that are responsible for their roles. What is the runway of influence that the finance ministry has in terms of making sure that the economy grows? And you spoke about the market structure at this point and the challenges that we have. How much influence then does the Ministry of Finance have in terms of getting the other organs of government to build resilience and strength?
Yes, and it's an important question. So I think critically we've got a very good economic policy unit in the National Treasury that does good modelling, good forecasting, good policy work, and so on. And ultimately that led to the creation of Operation Vulindlela. And that's one example of how does the Treasury pull levers across the states. Well, you've got to do it in conjunction with everyone else, but at the nexus of the state is the presidency, and that's why OV sits jointly with the presidency and the Treasury, so that we can pull cross-departmental levers on the policy space to try to get positive outcomes. So we can do all the policy work and the modelling, but a lot of it isn't in our domain. We're not the Department of Transport, for example. We're not the regulator for Transnet, for example. We're not the regulator for Eskom. We are the fiscal authority for the states. We help respond to pressures with fiscal policy decisions as rationally as we can. So in this environment, the presidency does the coordination function across the state. And so leveraging that and working in coordination with the presidency and then other departments, demonstrating on the back of the evidence that we produce in the economic policy space that this is good for the country and this will deliver growth, and making the case there so that OV at the center can pull those levers is an example of one of the things.
And just lastly, as we wrap up the conversation, just highlight then the fiscal strategies that Treasury will be looking to model the policies around, I guess, in the next.
So I think the critical thing is we've given forward communication to markets in last year's MTBPFs and again in the budget this year that we are targeting peaking debt to GDP, that we are targeting running a primary fiscal surplus and growing that primary fiscal surplus year after year. And I think that's critical, is that getting government borrowing under control so that we lower the risk premium for the states, we lower the cost of capital for the states, and so that's one of the key levers. The second thing is around infrastructure. And we have communicated that the fastest growing line item in the budget is the infrastructure expenditure, that we're changing the composition of government expenditure from consumption to investment, which will also produce positive economic outcomes. These are some of the critical changes. And of course, moving away from direct state investment to public-private partnerships, through simplifying regulations around public-private partnerships, making it easier for the state and the private sector to collaborate, reducing the red tape there. These are the critical things that we've been able to pull, and we're going to continue to pull to get reforms in, to get growth moving, and that will make it easier across the states to deliver the kind of investment that the state needs to make to produce good outcomes for society.
That was Finance Deputy Minister Ashor Sarupen.